Now I suspect that with this one they were trying to make an Apatosaurus that's in the middle of a fight and it's rearing on its hind limbs so that it can fight, which we'll have plenty of time to talk about Apatosaurus in the future, where if it were fighting it would be using its tail, not its front limbs and its mouth. But they've given it these short little front legs, and they've given it primitive feet and hands with 5 toes each. So I'm thinking it's supposed to be a prosauropod. And yes, I said the word prosauropod. There's a few people that will take issue with this, but in the context of this episode, I mean it to mean any sauropodomorph that is not a true sauropod. I think we're supposed to call them Plateosauria now, but I'm not really sure where we're standing on the whole cladistics as far as sauropodomorphs go. So, if we concede that it is a prosauropod, then we apply the stock dinosaurs trope and assume that any toy that's in existence that, would come in a box o' dinosaurs from China would be one of the ones discovered between like 1850 and 1920. Which means this really could only be 3 different creatures. You've got Anchisaurus, which I don't think this is because Anchisaurus was tiny and really lightly built. You've got Massospondylus, which is one of the ones that Richard Owen described himself, so we've known about that one for quite a while. That was from South Africa, and it was about the size of a horse. This appears to be more heavy set than that, so that leaves Plateosaurus, which could be the size of a horse, but could grow to the size of a rhinoceros because there was a lot of plasticity developmentally with that dinosaur. So I'm going to go with Plateosaurus on the grounds that we're going to be talking plenty about, American dinosaurs or British Empire dinosaurs, but Plateosaurus was described by von Meyer, and that's Germany, and it was found in South Germany. So, yeah, globalism. I guess we'll start with the head. The height of the head is pretty good, but Plateosaurus would have had really long, light skull, and it would have been, in profile, rather boxy, like pretty straight out until you get to the front edge of the antorbital fenestra. The hole in front of the eyes that all archosaurs had, except modern crocodiles, would shut up. Then the nose was sort of a tilted down looking dorky thing. They have the nostrils facing forward, so those should be off to the sides a little. And then teeth were probably okay. That's sort of a level of detail thing. It's not really, like these are clearly not carnivore teeth at least, so I'm going to say okay. It would have had a lot of tiny teeth, similar to a modern iguana, or an extinct iguanodon. Jaw were probably good as well. It's got a little bit of the, aside from the, it's not the right length, in proportion to the top jaw, it would have had a little bit of an underbite, and there was sort of a downward curve to the lower jaw, at least just in the specimens I've seen. Neck length is not bad. You at least have it, going into the back of the head the way that it's supposed to go instead of at a 90-degree angle, which you see a lot. Sauropodomorph neck posture is another thing that paleontologists keep going back and forth on. As far as I know, where we're currently standing is, when in doubt, it held its head high. So let's have I know this is rearing up to pretend that it's in a fight, but have the angle between the neck and the back be sharper and give it a little bit of an S-curve. Moving into the back, I don't mention the shape of the body very often, but this one is really good. Like it's got a tall oval cross section. You see a lot of dinosaurs reconstructed with a flat oval or a sort of a lizard sloped thing going on, but they were vertical creatures and they carried themselves upright, and good job, toy maker, on that front. I really think it should be parallel to the ground. Rule of thumb for Saurischians, back was parallel to the ground. Saurischians from the Greek, I keep doing that. Since I said Saurischian, which means lizard hip, let's talk about the hip. It did have a lizard-like hip. This would have been short in profile, and it wouldn't have had a lot of the spinal processes like what we saw on the Stegosaurus last episode. They've tilted it back, though, which you see a lot in the toys because they want to make them drag their tails. This was really common for the early half of the 20th century with the reconstructions. Hey, let's just take the hip and bend it back so that the tail drags on the ground. No, lift the hip up, straighten the legs, have the tail off the ground. Speaking of the tail, it's tiny and sort of rat-like. It should be bigger at the base and just continue slight S-curve to straight out, just balancing the creature. The center of mass would be over the back legs because it was a biped. And it's really, they've got it like swirled around, and you'd see that kind of flexibility like at the very tip of a Diplodocus tail, like, well, Diplodocus obviously, but also Apatosaurus or what have you. When they wanted to whip them around, there's a theory that that was for communication. Not that much flexibility for a prosauropod tail. And I'm aware of the problems that are presented when you try and design a bipedal toy that isn't a human, that you need to stand up. And it's much easier to make, a scaly kangaroo so that it can sit on its tail. But we're here to talk about how to make it accurate, not how to make it feasible from an engineering perspective. We're going to talk about the limbs, and some people have been sort of looking at me funny because I keep saying that it was a prosauropod and it was a biped. You see a lot of reconstructions where they're quadrupeds, but the most recent stuff that I've seen is they were actually bipeds because the front limbs were not able to pronate, which is where they would naturally be like this, but in this reconstruction, and in a lot of reconstructions that would assume quadrupedal locomotion, they would be like this. And it couldn't do this. It couldn't turn its hands towards its back legs. The front arms are really why I wanted to talk about Plateosaurus in the first place. If you go up to somebody and say dinosaur, there are really two images, unless they think of a velociraptor, there's really two images that they're going to think of. There's either going to be the Brontosaurus with the long neck and tail and just sort of stomping along, or it's going to be Tyrannosaurus Rex with its stubby little front arms that are the butt of so many jokes. Here come the prosauropods that look like somebody just took a small sauropod and stuck giant theropod arms onto it. And it's sort of a which way to the gun show sort of situation going on, except that they couldn't actually do the associated gesture because they couldn't pronate their arms. So to make this accurate, let's turn the arms like so and really make them beefier. Like the shoulders should be broader and the wrists should be wider. Now as far as the hands go, this is one of the few that I've seen with an actual accurate number of fingers, but they're all the same size. Like neither of these hands particularly looks like it could go up to a Lilian sternus and just smack it and cleave its skull open. And I realize that there's a theory that Plateosaurus's claws were used to manipulate plant matter, but that's boring. So the first finger, which would be the same as your it would be analogous to your thumb is what I should say, would be short and have a pretty long claw on it. And then the next two fingers would be long but with slightly smaller claws. And then the last two fingers were not vestigial but were very small. I'm not sure what they were used for offhand, but offhand. But they were small and there. Gonna avoid making puns like that. Back legs, not bad as far as length and ratios go, but should be straight again to carry the animal so that it's off the ground. Not sitting on its tail. The feet, the middle three toes would be the big ones. The middle three toes sort of looked like a theropod foot. Theropods were also saurischian, but different lineage. The innermost toe would have been smaller. It would have touched the ground, but it would have been smaller than the middle three. And the outermost toe was just a dew claw. It's walking on its heels like a human when it really should be walking on its toes like a dog. The term is digitigrade. It's called digitigrade because it's on its digits instead of plantigrade. So you might notice that I haven't mentioned anything about scale. That's because in proportion to the arms, the hands aren't bad, and in proportion to the legs, the feet aren't bad. It had rather tiny, delicate little feet for an animal this size. And this was late Triassic, so this was kind of the biggest dinosaur that had showed up on the scene that we know of. You know, size of a rhinoceros was pretty big at the time. I've seen an interesting theory that says because it had such tiny feet and such a large mass, that's why we have so many skeletons. So many skeletons specifically from the area of Pangaea that would later become Swabia in Germany. They theorized that it was a swamp and that small creatures like juvenile Plateosaura and you know, little theropods could run across the swamp just fine. But Plateosaurus had all of that bulk centered on these two little points, and it sunk into the mud and drowned. And that would explain why we have so many of those skeletons and so many adult skeletons. We have very few, if any, subadult Plateosaurs. So the feet are important to paleontology and to humans' understanding of our past, and that's why they should be accurate. I believe that is everything I wanted to say about Plateosaurus. Thank you for watching Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong. Please like, comment, and subscribe. You could even recommend dinosaurs for me to take apart. You could even mail me a dinosaur. We might put our address in the description, and you probably won't get your dinosaur back if you do mail it to me, though. You can even go to thegeekgroup.org to find out how you can become a member and donate, and we'll see you next time. I was actually able to find the notes that I took preparatory to this episode, so clearly I must have done at least some research, but still made some mistakes and had some omissions. I don't know why I was so confrontational about the term prosauropod. Like, I have since come around, apparently, on the subject of nomenclature and how we should use names that correspond to actual groups and not paraphyletic groups. Plateosaurus would be a plateosaurid. It would be a basal sauropodomorph. Basal sauropodomorph communicates what you're trying to say a bit better than prosauropod did anyway. In 2012, it was proposed that the type species of Plateosaurus, P. engelhardti, was actually known from such fragmentary remains that it wasn't actually diagnostic. We can't use those remains to say, okay, these other remains are clearly the same species, or the same genus in this case. So in 2019, the ICZN adopted that proposal and decided that Plateosaurus trossingensis is the type now. So right off the bat, our little lower third is wrong. On the subject of terminology, I said the word globalism. I meant it in like the yay, people from different countries cooperating on science sense, and not the sense that it gets used in my country quite a bit lately. There are plenty of non-crocodile archosaurs that also secondarily lost their antorbital fenestra or fenestrae, so I don't know why I made that distinction. I really should have talked about the teeth more, or about its ecology in general, but they had these little triangular teeth with denticles on either side, which is the shape you would expect if it's shearing plant material. Nowadays, I would feel obligated to mention that we can pose the neck in such a way that the bones are articulating in what's called osteological neutral pose. That does not necessarily suggest that that's how the animal was habitually holding its neck. Generally speaking, animals hold their neck erect so they can look around at things, and Plateosaurus was likely no exception. I don't know why I specified that it was Saurischia that would stand with their backs parallel to the ground. That was the norm for practically all dinosaurs outside of, like, Maniraptoriforms.
I intend to talk at some length about the way we biomechanically model this animal if we ever do a follow-up to Plateosaurus, but the tail actually had a really significant range of motion on it, at least determined by computer modeling. Interestingly, historically, bipedalism for Plateosaurus was actually the norm, or maybe I should say tripodalism, because initially you had a lot of restorations like these, where it's dragging its tail on the ground, but it wasn't until the late 70s, 80s that you started to see what to me is the classic Plateosaurus, which is the quadrupedal stance. Then workers figured out, oh, actually their hands can't pronate down to stand on. So clearly it was an obligate biped. On the subject of the forelimbs, they actually could supinate their hands, so that's going like this, but it was like a passive supination. Like if they had their arms resting on the ground in certain positions, their palms would be palm up. I don't know what purpose that might serve, but it is something they seem to have been able to do. The way I chose to portray the hand was bizarre. I may have been basing it on old diagrams of the hand bones, which have this fan-like layout. I guess what I was trying to do was keep the inward-facing orientation while also showing those big claws. But while the third and fifth fingers did oppose the first two, at least somewhat, when the hand is closed, the fingers couldn't twist the way that I showed them. In lateral view, the unguals are actually quite narrow. You wouldn't see the curvature of the claws when you're looking at the top of the hand. Finger 3 and especially 4 could waggle. They could move side to side, but as far as I know, the fanned out arrangement that I drew is impossible. The hind limb ratio of Plateosaurus, the difference between the length of the femur, the length of the shin, the length of the foot, the length of the toes, actually does suggest a pretty cursorial animal, an animal that could run. So not as ponderous as it has often been restored. I said that the fifth toe was a dew claw. The bones are just this little nub without much movement. It just kind of sits next to the very long fourth foot bone. I would not be surprised if this whole toe, air quotes, was just encased in the foot. And even if it had a proper toe, I can't imagine it had a claw. It's definitely not the long, mobile toe I drew in the original episode. Also, with the flat graphics that I used, you can't see that even though the first toe is shorter than the next three, the claw on it is enormous. It's even bigger than the already large second toe claw. As I suggested, we really need to do a follow-up, like a Synapisode or something about Plateosaurus. There is a lot of history we didn't cover. This is among the first dinosaurs known, and as such, there has been a somewhat convoluted taxonomic history, with a lot of species initially named and then either sunk into existing species or split off onto their own. It is a widely distributed group of dinosaurs that, like, we had an animal that we thought was Plateosaurus from Greenland of all places, but that's been split off into its own genus. I touched briefly on its paleobiology, but there's always more to be said. There's been extensive research into this animal, and also just a bunch of stuff that I would usually mention nowadays that I didn't, like how workers looked at the scleral rings and determined that it was probably cathameral, which is active whenever, probably resting during the heat of the day, but otherwise like a cow, just browsing for food in the middle of the night. We mentioned in Herrerasaurus, there was a 2020 paper that looked at the metabolism of Plateosaurus and what does possibly the first truly giant herbivorous dinosaur look like as far as how hot is it burning? What kind of integument does it need for such and such climate that it's living in? Were there restrictions on its range based on that metabolism? A lot of interesting stuff that we're not going to get into in detail here, but maybe in the future. And please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time. We would like to extend a special thank you to these individuals who have gone above and beyond to support this show. We could not have done it without you. Thank you.